DFUG community. I'm Angela Williams. I'm a clinical data manager at DFnet.
And I'm Carolyn Scott, also a clinical data manager here at DFnet. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation on DFdiscover database setup considerations for DFweb, DFcollect, and DFengage. And most of you know what DFexplore is. Most of you have set up your studies in DFexplore and manage them in DFexplore. But today we want to talk about the three other applications because they can be used together to manage a study, and they have a little bit differences in their setup. So we want to discuss the three different applications. But first, if you're not familiar with what they are, we want to explain what DFweb, DFcollect, and DFengage are. DFweb is a browser-based application for online electronic data capture. There's zero footprint and no installation required. It does require a browser with HTML5 capabilities such as Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. It has a lot of the same features as DFexplore. Basic validation functions such as adding, resolving queries, field skipping, edit checks, warnings, legal ranges, as well as advanced functions such as e-signatures, clinical coding, tasks, and randomization. DFcollect is a tablet-based application for online and offline data entry. This is very helpful if you have to go out in the field and need to record information for your study and want to upload it when you're back at a stable internet connection. It's available for iOS and Android via the Google Play or the Apple App Store. DFcollect also has basic data functions very similar to DFweb, as well as the same advanced functions. DFengage is our ePro, or electric patient recorded outcomes, mobile application fully integrated with DFdiscover. It's available for iOS and Android at Google Play or the Apple App Store. It does offline or online data collection, and it also sends out reminder notifications to the patients for new questionnaires. The nice thing about these applications is they can be used in conjunction with the same study. You don't have to stick to one application. For example, if you have a study that uses both eCRFs and patient surveys, you can use both DFweb and DFengage at the same time. The nice thing is they're both set up in DFsetup, and they also can be centrally managed in one application, such as DFweb or even DFexplore. So Angela is now going to tell us about some setup considerations for these three applications.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, so CRF Backgrounds. In DFexplore, you're used to seeing CRF Backgrounds, either a paper background imported in or an eCRF. The same is true for DFweb. You can use a paper background that is imported into setup, or an eCRF, or a hybrid in a study. And DFcollect, you cannot use a background CRF. You can use eCRFs only. DFengage is different in that you don't use either. You can, in setup, you can use both. You can have a CRF background and an eCRF background, but you won't see that in DFengage because it's one question per screen on the applicant's phone. Data fields. So in DFweb, you can have multiple fields per plate. eCRFs allow for an increased number of fields as opposed to a CRF background where you're limited in the number of fields you can add. In DFweb, you can add as many fields as you like, although you want to consider how long you want your plate to be for answering questions. DFcollect is the same as true. Multiple fields are allowed per plate, but in DFcollect, you can use screens that can group your data points together, such as vital signs as a screen header could combine all of your vital signs data points together. And in DFengage, it's one data field or group per screen. So you can see in this example, there's just one question, yes or no on your screen, and then you advance to the next screen. And prompts. So in DFweb and DFcollect, if you're using an eCRF, questions need to be built into the prompt. If the prompt is left blank, it diverts to the description, which will show in your question on the screen. So in DFweb, of course, if you're using a CRF background, you don't need to use your prompt field property at all. In DFcollect, you must use this to display exactly what you want to show, or as I said, it will divert to the description. Or you can add it as a screen. You can use the screen, insert screen, as more information for your prompt. In DFengage, questions need to be built into the prompt, so it's necessary to use the prompt field in DFengage, because if this is left blank, it does not divert to the description. It will show as blank. So you need to be very pay close attention to that when you're entering your prompts in setup. And instructions and help. So in DFweb, CRF Backgrounds, just like in DFexplore, you can add skip text or instructions to your CRF background if you're importing those into your setup. But for an eCRF, you need to add your CRF instructions or help either in text that can be displayed above the prompt, above the data field, below the data field, below the prompts, or to the right of the data field. And that's new in our 5.5. And then in DFcollect, skip text or skipped instructions can be displayed above or below the field. So if you have it above the prompt or above the field, the text will display directly above the prompt. If you want it below the field or below prompt field right, the text will appear below the prompt. So if you use our instruction prompt, that's where those instructions will show up in the application. Help is available for DFweb and DFcollect with the question mark will appear on your screen. And if you're using a tablet, you can tap the question mark and your help message will come up using the help property in setup. Same for DFweb. If you're using a tablet base, you can tap the question, or if you're using a laptop, you can click on the question and your help messages will appear. In DFengage, instructions and help are not supported in the current release. So you need to use a workaround to get instructions or skip text to show in DFengage. So we use a couple of different ways to do that. You can add a data field. We often use check fields, so that's the simplest way to do that. And you can add instructional text in the prompt, add an instructional label. And here's an example of that. You can see in DFweb, we have used our instruction property to use field right, and you can see that that instruction shows up to the right of the question. And in DFengage, here's the example where we had to be creative in using our instructions. We used a data field to provide instructions. We wanted the site to contact, or we wanted the participant to contact the site to discuss if they had symptoms. So we had to work that in as a checkbox. So our text is, please contact site to discuss these symptoms. And there's a checkbox with the text, I will contact site. So the participant just has to click on I will contact site and click next, and there's their instructional text.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to talk a little bit about grouping fields. So grouping fields allows for the prompt of the first field to be the question for all of the grouped fields. In this example below, choices for race are all grouped under one prompt, race, defined on the first field, field 16. All other fields will note in the prompt that they are grouped with field 16. And the database will then reflect the prompt or question from field 16, as well as the answers grouped with the first field. In DFweb and DFcollect, you can group any field. However, in DFengage, you can only group checked fields. It's useful to add to the prompt the mark all that apply, so that the user knows they have the option to mark more than one answer. And only sequential fields can be grouped. Skip logic is used for DFweb for the field properties, but can also be used with edit checks to hide or mask fields to be skipped. In DFcollect, it's limited on the tablet, but can also be used similar to DFweb to hide or mask fields to be skipped. Both DFweb and DFcollect will advance to the next field after the number skipped. In DFengage, skip logic via field property hides the skipped field or the group, and in that case, you advance to the next screen. Here's an example of a skip logic via edit check. You can see question 1, did the subject attend the study visit, is yes or no. And if they answer yes, there's no question after it. If they answer no, the question will pop up for them to provide the reason. So they conditionally show or hide the question based on the previous response. That's how you can use edit checks for skip logic. Modules for DFweb and DFcollect do not need to be set up in sequential order. However, for DFengage, they must be set up in the correct numeric order. If a module instance contains fields that are not sequential, meaning fields from a different module type or module instance are mixed in between, the DFengage will order these questions incorrectly. So here's an example of your modules. On the left, our module set up in the correct order. You can see the numbering 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the right, you can see they're out of order, 4, 2, 3, 5. This will make the questions in the data fields be displayed out of order. So you have to make sure they're set up sequentially. For field order, DFengage displays fields first in the module order and then by field. So your modules need to be set up sequentially, and then the fields within them also need to be set up that way. As you can see on the left, the fields are set up sequentially 23, 24, 25, and on the right they are not. You have module 9 and module 10, and then in between in blue are fields from another module. This will cause the questions to be out of order in DFengage. For languages, DFweb and DFcollect do not yet support multiple languages. DFengage, however, supports ePro translations into multiple languages by using a translation map, pulling from the prompts and the labels. The subject will choose the language at initial login, and that language will stay with the subject throughout the trial. For date fields in DFweb and DFcollect, you can use any date format. It's recommended, however, to use the same format throughout each of the plates to be consistent. In DFengage, the baseline and the ePro visit must have the same date format of day, day, month, month, year, 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 year. If any other format is used on any other plates, you can create a hidden visit date field and use an edit check to convert to the baseline format so that you can consistently pull your dates. Choice and check fields. In the data system, such as DFexplore or DFcollect or DFweb, when you're entering the data, the choice fields in DFweb and DFcollect are displayed as circles, and the check fields are displayed as checkboxes. In DFengage, both the choice and the check fields are displayed as circles. So in the setup, you want to be sure you add a clarifying note that says something like check all that apply, so that the user is aware that even though they're circles, you can give more than one answer. And you'll see on the bottom left for DFweb and DFcollect, the choice fields can be displayed as either a drop-down or a radio button specified in setup under the Show As field property. In DFweb and DFcollect, number fields, legal ranges can be defined for the number fields, and 0 is a valid number. In DFengage, legal ranges are not supported, and 0 is not a valid number. You will receive a warning when entering a 0, as you can see here on the screen. The alpha keys are hidden, and the decimal key is the only symbol available because you're using your phone. One recommendation for number fields is to set up the field as a VAS field. What that means is you set up a scale as opposed to a number field that you can use to define the low end and the high end number range, and then the user will pick a point along that line to report the number they need. So this is a shot of what a VAS scale looks like in setup. You do your prompt, you set it up as a style, a VAS style. You can put your units at the end and then precision, and then the left value and the right value, and it will, when you go into the actual database, it will look something like this. Definitely recommended for the in DFengage because of the limitations with the number fields, and use as much precision as needed in the setup. For DFweb and DFcollect, the visit and conditional maps are basically the same as they are in DFexplore and set up the same way. There are multiple types of visits allowed, such as baseline, optional, conditional, termination. So they support multiple cycles. Visits can be required or optional. The plates within the visits can be required or optional. They support conditional visits, conditional cycles, and conditional plate specifications. DFengage is different. In DFengage, you create separate visits for each ePro visit. All of the visits have to be type S, which is scheduled. You have to schedule it off of a baseline visit, so there's no cycles from the baseline. ePro plates must be required, It supports multiple cycles outside of baseline. It does not support conditional cycles, visits, plates, or termination cycles. So here's an example of a combination visit map. So as we discussed in the beginning, you can have a trial that uses DFengage and DFweb all set up in DFsetup using the same visit map. So in this example, the top part above the blue line are basically examples of how you would set up visits in DFweb, DFcollect, even DFexplore. You have your cycles, you have your screening visits, your baselines, your terminations. The blue line is an example of an ePro visit. And you can see it's set up with an S type, and it has to be for that. For all the visits that are ePro have to be set up that way. And you can see they alternate with an EDC visit as you go down the list. The EDC visits are visits for something like DFweb or DFcollect. So using combining the applications, you can use one visit map to set up what you need for both applications. The access to DFengage visits is controlled with role permissions. However, the other visits are set up as you would normally set up a visit in any study. So Angela's going to talk now about user and role considerations in DFadmin.
Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, so DFweb and DFcollect. Using DFadmin, it doesn't require special roles, but you can create special roles. You could have one role that's called DFcollect. For instance, if you have some members of your site staff that will only be using DFcollect, you can create a role called DFcollect and just assign it to those site staff members. Same for DFweb. In our API, we have a new, for our 5.5 release, there's a new section in DFadmin called API Clients, and you just want to check off which application they'll be using. And you can see an example here for DFweb. Highlighted, you just check DFweb for whatever role you're using. It could be site staff entry. Maybe they'll all be using DFweb. The same is true for DFcollect. Whatever role you want those users to be using DFcollect, you need to check that box. And DFengage is a little different. We must create a specific ePro role for DFengage users. And in tools and reports, you need to give them access to data view, setup view, and the visit map. And also API clients in our release in 5.5, you must click DFengage for that participant or that subject to be able to use DFengage. And in the permissions, you can see here's an example of where we set up the baseline visit. In this example, it's plate 100. So you give view-only access to the baseline visit and the baseline plate. So in here, visit 100 and plate 1, the baseline plate, they need to read the visit date. DFengage relies on that visit date at the baseline visit in order to schedule the visits for the user for their questionnaires. So you give view-only access to that, and they cannot create or modify data, queries, or reasons. And you get levels 0 to 5. If the baseline plate is validated at a higher level, they still need access to it. This plate, however, is not displayed in DFengage. It's view-only, so the user does not see that baseline plate. They merely see their questionnaire plates. And you can see on the second line below there, we have plates 20, 21, 22, and 23. Those are the questionnaires that the participant will see when they open the app on their phone. And again, this ePro visits, as Carolyn stated, you need to list ePro visits separately and individually. And here we list them out. And you can see in the orange line there, we listed visits 1, 2, 3, etc. And we primarily do this to avoid errors or omissions. We make sure that we are listing every visit where we want these ePro plates to show up. And we list out every plate. Instead of saying, 20 to 23, we say 21, 21, 22, and 23, just so that we can see at a glance exactly what visits and exactly what plates we want our DFengage users to see and be able to access. And you don't want to check hidden fields or internal queries. We don't want our participants to see the hidden fields, so you just, in case you have some hidden fields for, maybe some edit checks or you have hidden fields on your DFengage plates. Again, modify level 1 for online access only. So if your patient is just going to be submitting data online, it's fine to have level 1. They can just retrieve their data at level 1 and write to level 1. But you can have levels 1 to 5. So this is used when a user may complete data offline in case questionnaires are submitted in another manner. For instance, if the site is calling the participant and they have a paper CRF they could submit, maybe the site has submitted a CRF or a questionnaire on behalf of that participant phone call, and that's saved to, say, level 2. But if the participant has been offline and has entered their data, when they go back online and they submit that data, that will overwrite what was entered by the site staff. So patient data always overrules what has been entered. And this is also, it's captured in the audit trail, so you don't lose what has been entered previously. It's all captured in the audit trail. And right into level 1, the API brings data in at level 1. And again, the data is create and modify, and reasons are modify. And DFengage, so the ePro user, each ePro user you assign has a unique DFdiscover account. Here's an example where you can see the, we gave this participant, it's an alphanumeric number or ID. It's S, and we identify maybe the study number in there and maybe the participant ID or participant number in there. And this account is restricted to a specific study and a single site and subject ID. For instance, here you can see this is the study 596 and to site number 1, and it has access to only one subject. So you want to make sure that your ePro user has access to their subject data only. And you can see the role name is ePro data. They need to be given that specific role in order to create their login and password and access their surveys. And in our newer releases, you can now create bulk user accounts. For instance, if you have a study with 500 users or patients that will be using DFengage, you can create bulk user accounts with an initial temporary password. And at which point we now have that participants can change their password on their own in DFengage.
Thank you, Angela. We hope you found this presentation helpful. We hope you've been able to open up some other opportunities to use different applications other than just DF Explorer to learn that you can combine the applications. But if you do, there are some setup considerations you need to think about while you're designing your study. We will stop the recording now and answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.